Hey everyone, what's up? It's the Electrical Code Coach. So this time we're going to look at GFCI protection in the residential setting, in the dwelling unit. So whether this is an apartment, a condo, anywhere where people are living, this is going to fall under this category right here. So we're going to be dealing with the dwelling unit. We're in 210.8. We're dealing with ground fault circuit interrupter protection for personnel. And, there's been a few changes in the 2017. Some of it's just verbiage, like right here. It says that it must comply, if you're installing them, your installation must comply with 210.8A through E. And notice E is highlighted here, so that means it's changed. There must have been some confusing verbiage there. And then we're not going to get into it today, but there's always been an argument every single code cycle about, if this is the sink, where do you measure the 6 foot from? Is it inside the sink bowl? Is it from the water's edge? And that is recapped a little bit in here. Maybe I'll make another video about it later. But listen, guys, if you're that close that inches, 3 or 4 inches are going to make a difference on whether or not you put the GFCI, I say just go ahead and put it. But some guys just love to argue with the inspector. One funny thing I heard, arguing with the inspector is like arguing with a pig. The more you do it, the more you realize he likes it. So, all right, so moving on. So we're in dwelling units here. It says all 125 volt single phase 15 and 20 amp receptacles, and that's the key word here. So if that were to say outlets, then that would mean any, whether it's lighting, receptacle, or any type of outlet. But it says receptacles, and that really comes in key when you're out in the field installing. So installed in the locations that are specified through A1 through A10 or through 10. Must have ground fault circuit interrupters for personnel. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get going here. So in bathrooms. Now, this seems like a no-brainer, but sometimes you can have a very large bathroom and you ask yourself, I'm not within 6 feet of a sink. I'm way over here. There's a little makeup, anything. What this says here is it doesn't matter if the bathroom's 100 foot by 100 foot. Every single receptacle in that bathroom must be GFCI protected. So you can do that with a breaker, or you can do that with the GFCI receptacle and feed downstream. So there's a couple ways to satisfy that. All right, so here it says garages and also accessory buildings that have a floor that are located below grade level, not intended as habitable rooms, and limited to storage areas, work areas, and other similar areas for use. So your garages, your outbuildings, your post buildings, any type of building like that where really, guys, what it boils down to is that if there's going to be grounded surfaces and humans around, and electricity in use, you could be out there, with no shoes on. You could be out there leaning against, your steel frame building and touch something. We just don't want anyone to get killed, and that's really what GFCI protection is really all about. So GFCIs have probably saved more lives than any single electrical technology out there. I dare to say even more than the overcurrent device, because it's when you really need it in those situations where you're grounded and barefoot or wet. Okay, so right here is a really key one. Number 3 just says outdoors. So if you're doing a receptacle, and remember, don't forget, in this code cycle, in the 2017, it's only for receptacles that are 125 volts or less. That's going to change in the 2020 when we start getting into some of those updates in October. Okay, so any receptacle outdoors. There is one limited exception here if you're dealing with equipment that is not readily accessible and are supplying a branch circuit to dedicated snow melting machines. So I've never dealt with snow melting machines. Maybe some of you guys have. You can leave it in the comments. So that's one exception where it's not required. Okay, so here's a big one, a really important one that's easy to forget. Anytime you do a receptacle in a crawl space that is at or below grade level. So this is a really big one. So if someone's crawling down in there and, they're on their hands and knees, they are the definition of grounded out. So when they're working in that crawl space or they have a drill under there or something, we need to have them GFCI protected. So anything that is in a crawl space that's at or below grade level. And the state of Tennessee took it a step further. Unfortunately, we had, I believe it was a plumber pass away from backing into a lighting outlet. So in the state of Tennessee, you're actually required to GFCI protect lighting in crawl spaces as well, and that's a sad story there. Guys, one thing I want to point out is most of these codes, someone has died, and ultimately That's what we're trying to do, is avoid deaths, shocks, shock hazards. We don't want to leave you paralyzed or anything like that, or anything that could happen to you, with the use of electricity. So, okay, so let's go ahead and move on to part 5. It says unfinished portions or areas of basements not intended as habitable rooms. Now, this is going to be changing really hardcore, and it already is in the 2020 and moving forward, because a lot of people are spray painting the ceilings of a basement black and calling it finished, and then they're technically not required to have GFCI protection because it's, quote, finished. So there's some changes in the definition to the finished space, and when you get into the 2020, all outlets in a basement, all receptacles in a basement, 250 volts or less are going to be required. But this is the 2017, so this says just unfinished portions of those basements. But watch out when you get to the 2020 and later, everything in a basement that's a receptacle, 250 volts or less, is going to be required to be GFCI protected, because the definition of an unfinished basement, the line is getting so gray. When is it finished? When is it unfinished? I've done a basement where the guy just had can lights up in the ceiling, and I think they threw a throw rug out, and then, technically somebody could argue that that's finished. So that's a really important one there. So let's go ahead and move on. And we're going to be moving on to, there is an exception to part 5. It says when it's supplying, so that means must be an unfinished basements. It says, so it's part 5. It says a receptacle supplying permanently installed fire or burglar alarms is not required to be GFCI protected. Okay, so moving on to part 6, it says in kitchens, and this is one that can get easily mixed up. So in kitchens where the receptacles are installed to serve the countertop surfaces. So it kind of goes back to like the bathroom. It doesn't matter if it's within 6 foot of the sink. I believe this changed in the '08 code. So it's to cover all kitchen countertop receptacles. Doesn't matter if it's 100 foot away from a sink on the other side of the house. If it's technically in the kitchen, it's still going to be required to be GFCI protected. So over on the other side where they just have some cabinetry, even though it's super far away, if you could classify it as being in the kitchen, that countertop receptacles are going to need to be GFCI protected. So all right, so let's deal with sinks. And we're not going to get into all the nuances of measuring. Listen, if you're within 6 foot of the water, just GFCI protect it, guys. We're trying to save people from dying. If you're 6'2", I'm not going to pull, that close. I mean, sometimes if, 6-8 inches away, that's fine, especially if it's going to be behind something and but as long as you're that 6 foot away. But if you're 6'1", 6'2", and you're trying to, well, if I measure it like this, just GFCI protected. It's really not that big a deal, especially with the dual function technology, guys. So that's a really big one. Anywhere, any sink, doesn't matter if it's a wash sink, wash tub, whatever, you're going to be required to do it within 6 foot of the sink, have GFCI protection. So in boathouses, that's pretty well a no-brainer for us. We know that out in a boathouse, that's going to be, in a situation where you're like, I know I need GFCI protection here. And then it says bathtubs or shower stalls where receptacles are installed within 6 foot of the outer edge of the bathtub of a laundry, I started reading the next line, within 6 foot of the outside edge of the bathtub or shower stall. So it goes back to the same rule as a sink. If you're within 6 foot of that, you're going to be required to GFCI protect it. And then here is one, I'm trying to think of what code cycle they did it, and now it's also required to be AFCI protected in the 2017. But laundry areas, that really is a big one, and I'm really glad it's in the code, that laundry areas, and that's really going to be subject to the inspector and you. But listen, if there's going to be a washing machine in there, that's a laundry area. So that includes that entire room now. So the receptacle across the way, the receptacle for the washing machine, so that entire area. And remember, one thing I want to point out, when you're dealing with GFCI protection, it's required to be readily accessible. And I believe it says it right up here at the top at the beginning, that I'm trying to look for it here. It's required to be readily accessible. And we learned about what readily accessible means. So that's actually a defined term. You can flip back to Article 100 and learn about what readily accessible means. But a good quick example is you could not You could not put it behind a washing machine. That would not be readily accessible. So you'd have to put it in front to the side or up high enough. If you could reach it from the other side, most inspectors, if you could reach right there behind the washing machine. But most of us now, because it's required to be AFCI protected as well, we're just going to put a dual function breaker on it and we're going to call it done. So there's lots of different ways to satisfy this code. I do want to do a couple examples really quick of things you might run into. So out in the field, you may run into this scenario. So you have a refrigerator here and you have a sink right here. Okay, so behind here, we're going to say that it's 4 foot right here from here to here. And your receptacle's right there. And we're going to say that total distance from the sink to here is 4 foot. So by code, you're actually required to GFCI protect this. And because of this code right here, it must be readily accessible. So you're not going to be allowed to put a GFCI receptacle behind there. So you're going to have to go back to the panel. You're going to have to put in a GFCI receptacle. It's likely going to need to be arc fault protected as well. So you're going to go ahead and put in a dual function breaker. So what dual function technology is it does AFCI and GFCI and just standard overcurrent short circuit protection all in one whack. It's one of the best things that ever happened to the electrical industry. I'm all about dual function technology. It's, about saving lives and helping people. So I hope that you guys learned a little bit from tonight's video, and if there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let's keep growing together. I really thank you guys for all the comments and support. I just want to see you guys win, and let's look at the code book together. You guys have a great night. Thanks.